Recognize royalty, gotta recognize it. Recognize royalty, like they ain't got eyes to recognize royalty.
So, every now and then I like to read through my comments, and some of my favorite comments come from Beat Active, and I just wanted to share one of the comments he made. And I'm inspired today to just dive into what he sees as an interesting topic. He says American Dream. And I think he's from Puerto Rico or somewhere, but he's Hispanic, and he says his English isn't that good. So I'm just gonna read what he says though. He says, American Dream. Why you haven't created a few videos dedicated to Tariq Official 1526 means that Tariq and his FBA cult members all hate Caribbeans and Latinos. But according to Tariq himself and his official website, he proclaimed that the FBA official roots starts in 1526, which is an actual Spanish event, which the facts of that event is that they were Dominicans, meaning that the funny part of all is that according to Tariq proclamation, the original official roots of FBA are Dominicans, which is logical to say that Dominicans are the original FBA and not Black Americans FBA. I did a short about this. I think, he had mentioned it before, and I actually did a short about this because I was speaking with Kwame once about it. But I think that issue is just to die for. It's just incredible. It's like Tether's gold. It's right here. It's like it's Tether's gold. So, what he's saying is the 1526 stuff, the slaves that came here in 1526, which Tariq, cites as the origins of FBA, those slaves that came here came not directly from Africa. They came from the Caribbean. The Black slaves that came here in 1526, they came from Hispaniola, which is modern day Dominican Republic, I believe. So, Beat Active is just pointing out just the irony in it all, that through it all, foundational Black Americans are from the Caribbean, were brought here from the Caribbean. And there's just so much to be said about that. So just to finish what he says basically Dominicans can claim that they are FBA's fathers, and Tariq can't deny it because Tariq himself was the one who proclaimed the 1526 event as the roots or starting point of FBA, which means that it will crumble completely. Everything that they talk about, Caribbeans and Latinos. Yeah, you would imagine that it would crumble completely, but I don't know if facts really move these people. Facts don't move their mountain. So I just want to do a little bit of reading on just that, because I think it is absolutely an important piece of information to know. And I think it just puts everything in its proper perspective. And there's just so much that it says and reveals that it is worth talking about. All right, so I'm just going to do a little bit of reading. I'm going to go to the official FBA website. This is officialfba.com, which is Tariq's website, and just read what it says there about FBA history. Again, just to put everything in its perspective and kind of put everything together. It says foundational Black Americans are the proud descendants of the Black men and women who endured and survived one of the greatest atrocities in human history, American slavery. These resilient ancestors built the United States from the ground up, laying the foundation for the nation's economic, political, and cultural development. However, the rich history of FBA did not begin in 1619 with the arrival of enslaved Black people in Virginia. It began nearly a century earlier. In 1526, Spanish colonizer Lucas Vasquez de Ayllón brought the first documented enslaved Black people to the shores of what is now the South Carolina and Georgia coastline. Shortly after their arrival, these enslaved Black people courageously revolted against their captors, leading to the collapse of the Spanish settlement. The surviving Spaniards retreated to the Caribbean, leaving behind the liberated Black people. These freed Black people integrated with local Native American societies, marking a pivotal and often overlooked chapter in the lineage and cultural evolution of foundational Black Americans. And I think he actually pointed to that even there. So, he says the surviving Spaniards retreated to the Caribbean, which means that's where they came from. They brought their slaves in from the Caribbean. But just to finish this reading, it says, since that defining moment in 1526, the culture and identity of foundational Black Americans have been deeply rooted in building resilience, resistance, and an unwavering fight for justice. This spirit of perseverance and ingenuity has shaped every aspect of American society. And whatever this spirit is that he's talking about came from the Caribbean. So again, the spirit of perseverance and ingenuity has shaped every aspect of American society, from infrastructure and agriculture to music, art, and political activism. FBA are an exceptional people whose enduring legacy continues to inspire generations. But it came from the Caribbean. Right? These are slaves that came, the FBA origin is in the Caribbean. And whatever that spirit is that they brought here to create America is a spirit they brought with them from the Caribbean. Or, from Africa by way of the Caribbean. Yeah, so that's what we want to talk about. The rest of what he's talking about goes into some other stuff. But no, let me just read the whole thing since I'm here. It says, it is important to clarify that foundational Black Americans is not a group or an organization, and there's no designated leader of FBA. FBA is a lineage-based designation that specifically refers to the over 43 million Black Americans who are direct descendants of the freedmen, the formerly enslaved Black people who were emancipated in the United States. This lineage represents a unique and unbroken connection to the foundational builders of this nation. And that lineage is unbroken all the way back to the Caribbean. It's unbroken to the Caribbean. We honor and celebrate the rich history, cultural contributions, and unyielding strength of foundational Black Americans. This recognition is not only a tribute to our ancestors, but also a commitment to preserving and advancing the legacy they established. So it's right there in the website. It is right there in the website. And let me read it one more time just for emphasis. It says, since that defining moment in 1526, the culture and identity of foundational Black Americans have been deeply rooted in building resilience, resistance, and an unwavering fight for justice. This spirit of perseverance and ingenuity has shaped every aspect of American society, from infrastructure and agriculture to music, art, and political activism. So it goes back, so all of that goes back to 1526, which goes back to Caribbean folks. And just to, make it clear that it does in fact go back to Caribbean folks, I'm gonna read what ChatGPT says about this event. It says the year 1526 is significant in Hispanic history because it marks the founding of the San Miguel de Guadalupe colony, the first European settlement in what is now the United States, established by the Spanish. Key points about the 1526 event. San Miguel de Guadalupe was founded by Lucas Vasquez de Ayllón, a Spanish explorer on the coast of what is now either South Carolina or Georgia. This settlement predates St. Augustine, 1565, and the English colonies like Jamestown in 1607. The colony was short-lived, lasting only a few months due to disease, harsh conditions, and conflicts. Enslaved Africans were brought to the colony, and historians believe that the first recorded slave rebellion in North America occurred there when some of the enslaved Africans revolted and escaped to live with local native tribes. The settlement was ultimately abandoned, and Ayllón died during the expedition. So these were Africans that were brought in from the Caribbean, right? The Caribbean was the spot that they would land first and unload their cargo and decide which cargo would go. So just to be clear, I said to ChatGPT, I said, so the slaves in the 1526 were brought to America from the Caribbean? And ChatGPT says, yes, the enslaved Africans brought to the 1526 San Miguel de Guadalupe colony were most likely transported from the Caribbean, not directly from Africa. Here's how we know that. Spanish practice at the time was to stage enslaved Africans in the Caribbean before sending them to mainland territories. The Spanish had already established colonies in the Caribbean by the early 1500s, including Hispaniola, modern-day Haiti, and Dominican Republic and Cuba, where enslaved labor was already being used in gold mining and agriculture. So let's be clear, FBA, that's their lineage. Their lineage goes back to the Caribbean. So the people that they claim their lineage goes back to in 1526, those enslaved people from the Caribbean, like those people's lineage go back to the Caribbean. So FBA's lineage would also have to go back to the Caribbean. Because these slaves likely had family that were left in the Caribbean. Why isn't that a possibility? So the lineage is likely there in the Caribbean. Says Lucas Vasquez de Ayllón, the Spanish leader who led the 1526 expedition, had previously been involved in slave trading. He likely acquired enslaved Africans from the Caribbean, especially from Santo Domingo, where Spain had already begun importing enslaved people from West Africa to replace the rapidly dying indigenous population. Records indicate that about 100 enslaved Africans accompanied Alion's colonists. When the colony collapsed, some of these enslaved people revolted and escaped, making this possibly the first African slave rebellion on what is now U.S. soil. And they may have landed on U.S. soil, but they weren't brought here to build the U.S. Right? It's American soil. It's North America, but it's not the United States of America. They were brought here by the Spaniards. They were a Spanish colony at the time. They were working on a Spanish colony for Spain. So we wouldn't classify these people as foundational Black Americans. They were foundational Black Spaniards, if anything, at that time. So, not trying to be petty, but it is what it is. They weren't brought to America. They were brought with Spanish colony. And that's what they were working on, and that's what they were building, was that Spanish colony, or they were working to build the Kingdom of Spain. So in summary, the enslaved Africans in the 1526 expedition were not brought directly from Africa, but transshipped via the Spanish Caribbean colonies like Santo Domingo or Cuba, which already had developed systems for slavery and colonial logistics by that time. But let me go back to Tariq's website, because there is something else that he speaks of that I think should be addressed. On the FBA flag, there are 3 stars. And this is how the website explains the 3 stars. It says the 3 stars represents the 3 groups who make up the ethnic group that would become foundational Black Americans. And these are the 3 groups: the Black Aboriginal people of North America, the Black explorers and traders who had contact with the Americas before Columbus, and the captives brought to the Western Hemisphere from Africa. Right? So those are the 3 groups: the Black Aboriginal people of North America, the Black explorers and traders who came here before Columbus, and the captives brought to the Western Hemisphere from Africa, which are the 1526, 1619 transatlantic slave people, right? But the ones that they're claiming from Africa began with the 1526 people that came here from Africa. And even after that, it's more likely that you ended up in America after landing in the Caribbean. Without really knowing how long you stayed in the Caribbean for. Sometimes you may have stayed in the Caribbean for years and then shipped to America for whatever reason. But most of the slaves that ended up in America have lineage in the Caribbean, right? Or ended up here via the Caribbean. So the first 2 stars, I want to look into those 2 stars as well, just to see if there's any validity to those 2 stars. So the first one are the Black Aboriginal people of North America, and then the Black explorers that came to America before Columbus. Because, if you criticize their 1526 stuff and say those are Caribbean people, they can always go back and say, no, we're the Aboriginals that have always been here in America, or we explored here, but even before Columbus, right? So let's look at those and see if there's any validity to any of that. And we're just gonna go ahead and ask ChatGPT about their first star, the Aboriginal people of North America. And I asked ChatGPT, is there evidence of Black Aboriginal people living in North America? And it says the idea of Aboriginal people of North America, meaning people of African descent who were indigenous to North America before European contact, is a controversial and heavily debated topic. Here's a breakdown of the evidence, claims, and scholarly consensus. Mainstream scholarly consensus. Mainstream anthropology, archaeology, and genetics hold that the original inhabitants of North America, the Native Americans, came from Asia via the Bering Strait land bridge, beginning over 15,000 years ago. Native American populations are genetically and culturally distinct from Africans. There is no credible archaeological or genetic evidence of a widespread African origin population indigenous to North America before European colonization. So that says what that says. There's no credible archaeological or genetic evidence of a widespread African origin population indigenous to North America. The only indigenous Americans they find are the ones that came through the Bering Strait, the ones that are related to those folks. None that have these African features. Despite this, then it says alternative theories and claims. Despite this, some alternative historians and cultural thinkers, especially within Afrocentric, Moorish Science Temple, or Black nationalist traditions, have claimed that Africans were present in the Americas pre-Columbus, possibly as sailors or traders. Listen to this. This is Afrocentric, Moorish Science Temple, Black nationalist traditions. This is just all of this stuff about, they're just following stuff that we know today are clearly pseudo. So this idea of them being Aboriginal to North America is based on pseudo-science, pseudo-history, like just anything pseudo. Some Native American groups had dark skin, woolly hair, and broad features, leading to the belief they were Black or African in origin. The Olmec heads in Mexico, with their broad noses and full lips, are sometimes cited as evidence of African presence in ancient Mesoamerica. However, the Olmec civilization is understood by archaeologists to be indigenous to Mesoamerica, with no definitive African genetic or cultural links. Ancient DNA studies do not support significant African genetic contributions to pre-Columbian populations in North America. So there it is. So there it is to the first two stars. The first two stars is pseudo information. They're pseudo stars. Number 3, documents and explorers' accounts. Some early European explorers wrote of seeing dark-skinned natives or Negroid features among some tribes. Example, the Yamasee, Washita, or Calusa. These have been interpreted by some groups as evidence of Black Aboriginal Americans. However, these descriptions were often racially ambiguous and reflect Eurocentric biases or misunderstandings of phenotype diversity. These tribes are now generally classified as Native American with no direct African origin unless through later admixture. Example, after African slavery began in the Americas. Number 4, Afro-Indigenous admixture, post-1942. There is well-documented history of Black and Native American admixture. Many freed or escaped Africans intermarried with Native American tribes. Example, the Seminoles, Creek, and Cherokee. This created Afro-Indigenous communities, but after European colonization, not before. Number 5, examples of groups associated with these claims. Some groups who promote or explore the idea of Black Aboriginal Americans include Moorish Science Temple of America, pseudo, Washita Nation, pseudo, Hebrew Israelites, some sects, pseudo, some Pan-Africanist scholars or grassroots researchers, pseudo. These views are often dismissed by mainstream academia, but continue to hold cultural significance for many people in terms of reclaiming lost identity or resisting Eurocentric historical narratives. So there you have it. There really is only one star, and there should only be one star on that flag, and it's the FBA origins are slaves that came here from Africa by way of the Caribbean. Those people that had that ethnogenesis, if there was an ethnogenesis, these were Caribbean people that had an ethnogenesis. So just to summarize, the claim that Africans came to America pre-Columbus is weak and contested. The claim that Africans are indigenous to North America, there's no solid evidence. The claim that Africans intermarried with Native Americans post-1942, the evidence is strong. Some Native Americans had African-like features. The evidence is that phenotypical overlap, but not a genetic link. And just to be clear, I asked the question again. It did speak of it, but for some reason I asked the question again. Is there evidence of Black explorers and traders in North America before Columbus? And it says the idea that Black explorers or traders reached North America before Columbus is a popular theory in Afrocentric historical circles, but remains highly contested and not accepted by mainstream historians. Here's a breakdown. The claim that Africans reached the Americas before Columbus, Abu Bakr II and the Mali Empire. The claim is that Mansa Abu Bakr II of Mali abdicated his throne in the early 14th century to lead a voyage across the Atlantic with a fleet of ships. Source: the story comes from Arab historian al-Umari, who interviewed Mansa Musa in Cairo in 1324. Theory: some believe these voyages reached the Americas, particularly the Gulf of Mexico or Brazil. Evidence: there is no archaeological evidence to support this claim in the Americas. The story of Abu Bakr's voyage is documented, but the final outcome is unknown. Olmec heads and Negroid features. The claim: the Olmec civilization of ancient Mesoamerica in 1200 BCE produced stone heads with features said to resemble Africans. Theory: some suggest these are evidence of African contact with pre-Columbian civilizations. Scholarly response: Mesoamerican scholars argue these features are indigenous and consistent with local populations. No African DNA or African cultural artifacts have been found in Olmec sites. Columbus's own writings claim Columbus wrote about encountering dark-skinned people in the Caribbean, whom he believed came from the South or Africa. Some interpret this as implying African voyages to the Americas before 1492. The scholarly view: these accounts are anecdotal and speculative. They don't serve as hard evidence of pre-Columbian African presence. African trade winds and currents. Atlantic currents like the Canary Current and Equatorial Countercurrent could have carried ships from West Africa to the Americas. Theory: African sailors might have unintentionally or intentionally crossed the Atlantic before Columbus. Problem: while it's physically possible, there is no archaeological record of African settlements or trade goods in the Americas prior to 1492. Other commonly cited points with weak evidence. Claim: pre-Columbian African inscriptions in the Americas. Status is debunked, misinterpreted. Claim: African plants like banana or yam found in pre-Columbian Americas. Status: timing inconsistent or not proven. The claim: Negroid skulls found in ancient graves. Status anthropologically disproven or inconclusive. What is supported by evidence? Post-Columbian contact between Africans and Native Americans is well documented, especially through the transatlantic slave trade and maroon societies. Afro-Indigenous communities did exist, but these formed after 1492, not before. Summary. Topic. Africans reached Americas before Columbus. Status unproven, plausible, but unverified. African explorers or traders settled in North America before 1492. No archaeological or documentary evidence. Abu Bakr's voyage from Mali, documented in oral history, but outcome is unknown. Afrocentric theories are culturally significant, academically disproven. So there's that. So again, the first two stars, pre-Columbian explorers and Aboriginal Negroid types, those have been debunked, I believe. And there's no validity to any of that. The only thing that's valid, the only thing, and even if there was validity to them, even if there was validity to these things, you know, especially the explorers pre-Columbus, those explorers would have been coming from Africa, right? And those Aboriginal, as certainly as the Aboriginal Native Indians came here through the Bering Strait from Asia, those Negroid type Africans would have come here through some other avenue, if not the Bering Strait. They would have gotten here through some avenue through Africa. But regardless, they would have still had African lineage. But the one we do know about, the third star of 1526, those are Caribbean people. So the FBA lineage goes back to the Caribbean. FBA lineage goes back to Caribbean slaves that were here, that were brought here from the Caribbean. And it's also more likely that FBA would have lineage in the Caribbean than here in America. Like real lineage, not this fake lineage that they talk about. It's very likely that that's where their lineage goes back to the Caribbean and then back to Africa. Because this Aboriginal stuff is nonsense. It's foolishness. There's no evidence supporting that. So that's where we are. That's what it is. You know, FBA got some explaining to do. They got to explain the tethers at the foundation of their lineage.
Listen very, very carefully.
Just because we're black, they say we are slaves. Speak of righteousness, they say we are praise. Just because we're black, they say we are slaves. Speak of righteousness, they say we are praise. Brought us from the motherland in bondage and chains. Bury our culture and change our names. They claim we're free, yet we are in pain. As long as there's life, there's a lot to gain. Just because we're black, they say we are slaves. Speak of righteousness, they say we are praise. Just because spoke his words, they said he was deranged. Marley sung his songs, they said the same. Malcolm X and Martin Luther fought relentlessly so we could be better. Just because we're black, they say we are slaves. Speak of righteousness, they say we are praise. Just because we're black, they say we are slaves. Speak of righteousness, they say we are praise. Brought us from the motherland in bondage and chains. Bury our culture and change our names. They claim we're free, yet we are in pain. As long as there's life, there's a lot to gain. Just because we're black, they say we are slaves. Speak of righteousness, they say we are